This is what most people thought of as a Western movie in the late 1940s. A simple story with a true blue hero, a black-hearted villain, and plenty of action. Even in the more mature Westerns by filmmakers like John Ford, there was a nobility to the heroes. And by the early 50s, most outdoor pictures, even the B-movies, were being shot in color. Consider then how unusual High Noon must have seemed in 1952. A stark black and white film with no picture postcard scenery, no action until the final moments, and a hero who wasn't afraid to admit he was afraid. High Noon went against so many conventions of the Western film that it actually angered some people. But this little, modest, low-budget film went on to win 4 Academy Awards and earn a reputation as one of the greatest of all American films. Hello, I'm Leonard Maltin, and I'm going to try to explain how High Noon came to be and why it's come to be thought of as a classic. A man alone, driven by his conscience to do what he must do. I could be discussing a Shakespearean drama, but in fact, I'm describing High Noon, a morality play that just happens to be a Western. There is no setting more universal in terms of storytelling than the Old West. Screenwriter Carl Foreman understood that when he conceived his story about a lawman who refuses to desert his town or his responsibility. Foreman's idea proved to be similar to a story that had appeared in Collier's magazine in 1947. So for protection, producer Stanley Kramer purchased the rights. The final screenplay bore little resemblance to the story, except for the theme of the town marshal, named Doane, who decides to face the 4 men who are coming to kill him. As Foreman's screenplay neared completion, the writer began to see his story as a parable for what was happening all around him, as colleagues in Hollywood were being deserted by their so-called friends. High Noon was made in the midst of the congressional investigations into the so-called Red Menace in Hollywood. Communist sympathizers, both real and imagined, were being hounded and exposed. And believe it or not, some people found this film un-American. The fact that the screenwriter, Carl Foreman, had been an unfriendly witness before the House Un-American Activities Committee didn't help. High Noon's producer, Stanley Kramer, remembers what it was like when the movie opened.
We were picketed by every kind of group in the world, from the Ku Klux Klan to the All-American Activities Committee, or whatever they call it. I think that you stand for what you are. The picture is there. Is it moral? Yes. The marshal leaves the town because the town did not stand behind him against the people who entered. So it's moral. Is it American? I think so. It's a part of the Old West. Is it something that you can truthfully back with your feelings, your emotions, your morals? I did, and I believe in it.
Kramer didn't see High Noon as a political picture. Neither did the man he chose to direct the film. Viennese-born Fred Zinnemann had graduated from short subjects and grade B movies to top-drawer feature films in the late 1940s.
I had a 3-picture contract with Stanley Kramer's company. The other pictures were The Men and A Member of the Wedding. And I was offered High Noon, and naturally I jumped at it because the script was excellent. There was a first draft script by Carl Foreman with the help of Kramer, which was first class. So I said yes, by all means. Some people said, how can a Viennese director do a Western? Well, it wasn't all that difficult, really, with people like Cooper and a few others.
Zinnemann was always attracted to stories about people facing a crisis of conscience. But like the visual storyteller he is, when he first thought about High Noon, he latched onto one potent image.
I saw those tracks, the railroad tracks, that static shot where nothing moved. Became very important to me. Not to show anything specific about the threat and see the heavies strutting around or anything.
Zinnemann's background in low-budget movie making came in handy on High Noon because this film was made for $730,000, a low figure for a major league movie even in the early 50s. The film was shot in just 28 days, and the markings in the director's shooting script show the kind of detail he tried to inject into the picture, in spite of its grueling production pace. Zinnemann didn't want to miss any nuances in Carl Foreman's script, from showing Marshal Will Kane's reluctance to retire his badge after the wedding, to adding realistic details that might add to the credibility of the story. Zinnemann's main visual collaborator was cinematographer Floyd Crosby. Together, they decided to avoid the pretty look most people associated with Westerns. This film would have no beautiful cloud-filled skies. Instead, it would look stark, arid, real, as if it were a documentary or a newsreel. The late Floyd Crosby's son, rock star David Crosby, remembers his father's work on High Noon with pride.
He was very proud of it. He really loved it. You know, not that he would have told you that, but he was very proud of it, and he was very proud of working with Fred. He loved Fred Zinnemann. He had been friends with Fred Zinnemann since Fred came to America. He had befriended him early on when Fred was still learning English, and they were very good friends. And so it was a tremendous opportunity, you know, for him to work with the best people and do, you know, what he felt was a really quality piece of work. And he was just, I know he was very happy about it.
But all that skill behind the camera would have been for naught if the audience didn't connect with the movie on an emotional level. That meant casting the right actors in every part, beginning with the star, the man that most people at that time regarded as the quintessential American, Gary Cooper. The tall man from Montana had no formal training as an actor, but that didn't stop him from becoming one of the greatest stars in movie history, and one of the most persuasive screen actors of all time. He loomed large on-screen and off, as his High Noon co-star Lloyd Bridges recalls.
I loved the man before I saw him, and I think I loved him even more after I talked with Coop, because he was such a down-to-earth, simple, no airs of any kind. He was what you saw on that screen.
More than one director has said that in person, Cooper's performances seemed dull, almost invisible, until they saw them on the screen.
He made it so easy. Matter of fact, most of the time I was working with him, I didn't feel it was on camera, you know. When we had our first scene, I thought, my God, is this it? Is that going to be a print? It was a print, all right, and he was magnificent up there, yeah.
Grace Kelly was virtually unknown when she was chosen to play Cooper's bride in the film. She'd only been in one other picture, in a small role, when Stanley Kramer went to see her in an off-Broadway play.
I met her and signed her when I met her, or determined to. And that was it. There was no great discovery or anything. I don't know why Grace Kelly didn't achieve under our banner what she achieved later. She became a vital, tremendous, active star. In our film, she was known as the young lady who came through very well opposite Cooper, period.
Director Zinnemann agreed that she had the right look for the part, but he worried that people might question the age difference between her and Cooper. No one did. Equally unknown to American moviegoers at that time was Mexican actress Katie Jurado. But like Kelly, she made a strong impression in this film and established herself overnight. The cast was fleshed out with veteran character actors like Otto Kruger as the opportunistic judge, and Oscar winner Thomas Mitchell as the level-headed mayor. The film was also a showcase for young character players like Harry Morgan, in one of his slimiest parts, and Robert Wilkie, who was in the process of establishing himself as a potent screen villain. Notes in Fred Zinnemann's copy of the script indicate some of the casting possibilities that were considered. For the part of Frank Miller's brother that went to young Sheb Woolley, such other up-and-comers as Hugh O'Brien, Peter Graves, and Fess Parker were considered. And for the part of Mart Howe, Lon Chaney won out over other actors because, apparently, the director was struck by his flat voice. Just the note he wanted for a world-weary retired Marshal. Still, the one piece of casting that made the picture work was having Gary Cooper in the lead. In a late 50s television interview, Dave Garroway asked Cooper why he made so many Western films.
I like Westerns because the good ones are real. You feel real when you're making them, and, well, you don't feel actorish. The Western picture tells stories of the pioneer period. The pioneers braved the elements, and we are brought close to the pioneer people by seeing the Western picture, and we realize that our country was and is full of people who believe in America.
To create High Noon on a tight shooting schedule, director Zinnemann used a technique that's common nowadays, the drawing of storyboards to plot out every key shot in the film, including staging and camera movements. Although some scenes were scheduled to be shot on location in Sonora, California, which still had a stretch of straight railroad track running alongside it, most of the picture was set to be shot in Burbank, on a studio backlot known as the Columbia Ranch. Zinnemann, his art director Rudolf Sternad, and his cameraman Floyd Crosby planned their moves meticulously to avoid wasted time and effort, and to build the tension they needed to make the story work. For Zinnemann, there were three basic elements that made the picture.
The first element was the threat, which was shown by the railroad tracks that lead across the horizon. And you never see the evil, but you know it's going to come from there. Number two, against that static shot, there were the shots of a man running around town asking for help, which is not about to get. And number three, to dramatize that time is dripping away minute by minute. You had the clocks, which were in the script, and which are shot in such a way that as the tension progressed, the clocks became bigger and bigger, and the pendulums moved more and more slowly. And at high noon, it all came to a stop. So the clocks were an integral part from the beginning. Before it even came on the film, it was already in the script.
The use of clocks is one of the most interesting aspects of High Noon, because unlike most movies, the story unfolds in just about the length of time it takes to watch. Now, on occasion, Zinnemann manipulates time, but the emotions we feel are as real as the tension felt by the characters as that clock ticks away the minutes toward high noon. There's also no denying that the film is superbly edited by Elmo Williams and Harry Gerstedt. In spite of meticulous planning, nothing ever goes exactly as planned when a movie is made. The script called for a brutal fight between Marshal Will Kane and his hot-headed deputy. Gary Cooper was reluctant to shoot the scene because he was having back trouble at the time, but he was finally persuaded to do it.
My son Bo was about 6 years old at the time, and he'd heard about this fight. Of course, wanted to see it. So there was a hayloft up above where we were going to fight. So before we started the rehearsal, I snuck him up there and with his mother, and the scene ends with Cooper dousing with this big pail of water, and that was just too much for Bo. He burst out laughing, ruined the take, and we had to do it all over again. But to show what a great guy Coop was, the next day, he had us join him for dinner. He was a sweet man.
The director got his shot, and the actor saved his relationship with the star. But on another occasion, the film almost lost both its director and its cameraman.
We needed a shot of the train approaching and stopping right in front of the camera. And to get the right angle, we were lying absolutely flat between the two rails, with the camera down on the ground. And the train was on a straight line about a mile away, and I gave the signal to start, and on it came. It looked beautiful. And then he let out some white smoke, and that looked great. Then he let out some black smoke, which looked even better. But what we didn't know was it was a signal that his brakes were failing. So we didn't know, so we kept on shooting and coming closer and closer with the black smoke. And I don't know, some people, when it's really life or death, everything slows down. It's a very curious psychological thing. But suddenly, I saw it almost in slow motion. The cameraman grabbing the camera like that, and then trying to pull it out of the way, and then a hook on the tripod hooked on the rail, and the camera fell down. And the train went whoomp very fast, right across, and left. And then I looked, and I saw the cameraman standing and looking down at it, and the camera was smashed. But the magazine was intact, and the shot is in the picture, the black smoke.
With no loss of life or film, production continued, and within a month, shooting was complete. The film then retired to an editing room, where first Zinnemann, then Kramer tried to shape and perfect the story. In the editing process, an entire subplot was dropped. In this deleted scene, actor Jim Brown plays one of Kane's deputies, who's bringing a prisoner, played by stuntman John Daheim, back to Hadleyville. Kramer and his director now felt that these scenes, shot for insurance, lessened rather than heightened the intended suspense. A comic relief scene involving town drunk Jack Elam was also abandoned. Meanwhile, Stanley Kramer was in the process of starting a new company and going to work for legendary Columbia Pictures boss Harry Cohn. Cohn expressed interest in seeing Kramer's unfinished High Noon, but Kramer put him off. He didn't think Cohn would like it. But one weekend, Cohn simply borrowed the print without Kramer's knowledge.
Well, I went in Monday morning, stormed into his office where he sat, surrounded by the Oscars, past replicas of all the Oscars. I said, Harry, that stinks. How dare you take a film which isn't a Columbia film, as the United Artists film, and take it and run it without my permission? He said, oh, come on, kiddo, don't make a big fuss. Listen to the kid, he said to somebody in the office. He said, what difference does it make? So I ran it. It's a piece of junk anyway. Well, it was High Noon, and he made a mistake.
When my father was asked what his highlight was of his career, he would have to say that it was the night of the Academy Awards when he sang the song, Dmitri Tiomkin, Ned Washington's song, Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, when he sang it for the Academy. And then, of course, that night it won Best Song. I'm real proud that in some way it's filtered down to my family, and then my kids, will always watch this film.
For all its success, High Noon had a curious aftermath for several of its key participants. Screenwriter and associate producer Carl Foreman had fled from Hollywood and was living in exile in England by the time the film was finished. And others suffered too during this terrible period of blacklisting.
I thought after I did High Noon that my future would be pretty rosy. But anyone who was sort of liberal in those days or wanting to do anything about improving humanity kind of suffered. It was a terrible period. And I was a part of an organization called the Actors Lab, and there apparently were quite a few communists in that organization. So I suppose that was one of the reasons why I was put on the list and worked for several years.
My dad had a real tough time because of it for a long time. He was, I think, one of the best cinematographers that came out of, early filmmaking, and had a long career that could have, where he was denied access to the tools, that he would have loved, for a long period of time. I think it was shameful.
Evil was very strong in those days.
High Noon received accolades galore when it was new, including 4 Academy Awards. 2 for Dmitri Tiomkin, one that he shared with Ned Washington, 1 for film editors Elmo Williams and Harry Gerstad, and 1 for Gary Cooper, his only Oscar. But the film's story is so timeless, so great, that it continues to impress people who discover it for the first time today.
The reason I did it was not only because it was a good story, but it said something about human nature, which apparently never changes, in that there is a man who is in desperate trouble and is asking for help, and nobody is there to help him, everybody having very, very good personal reasons of his own, which is what happens every day, and it has never changed. And you can see it time after time after time. And this is what I think makes it a timely movie.
Hello, I'm Maria Cooper, Gary Cooper's daughter, and welcome to the 50th anniversary tribute to High Noon. It's a real pleasure for me. High Noon was a movie that my father was especially proud of, and it's a film that meant a great deal to my whole family. My father didn't appear in as many Westerns as his friends, Joel McCrea, Jimmy Stewart, Duke Wayne, Randy Scott, and Glenn Ford. But he did become known as the archetypal Western hero. 50th anniversary? It doesn't seem possible. High Noon has even become part of the lexicon. To be High Noon means to be left in the lurch. Talk about enduring.
The idea really came to my father in about 1947, and he wrote a 4-page outline. And in that time, someone brought to the attention of my father a short story called The Tin Star that had been published in one of the Slicks, one of those magazines that published short stories in those days. And he read it, and it was very similar to the idea he'd had, and he wasn't sure if maybe he'd even read The Tin Star. I mean, there are differences in the two stories. But he then optioned The Tin Star anyway, and eventually, after The Man and Champion and Serenade Bergerac had all been made, it became time to make High Noon, and they found Fred Zinnemann to direct it.
Well, first of all, as a child growing up in Vienna, he was fascinated by the West through a series of books by a German author called Karl May, who was very popular at the time, and he wrote a series of fantasy westerns, but he himself had never been to America or the West, but it fired up my father's imagination, and so when he became involved with movies, westerns were something that were very dear to his heart.
This was Fred Zinnemann's first and only Western, and some doubted that an Austrian Jew could direct a Western, the most American of genres.
To be able to go out on a school night to Long Beach to see his latest movie, and also the fact that it was a Western, couldn't have been more excited. After it was over, all the executives were forming into little groups, whispering, and I just went into the bathroom where 2 other executives were, and I heard one of them say to the other, well, what does a European Jew know about making Westerns anyway?
My father and Zinnemann worked very, very closely on the script before they went into production. Of course, they'd had many drafts, but they went over it, line by line, very intensely.
The picture was made in 28 days for $750,000, so they didn't have the luxury of time, and they didn't have time to experiment.
That's right, and Fred and his old friend, cinematographer Floyd Crosby, developed a different look. They patterned that look after the Civil War photographs of Matthew Brady.
Together they developed a style which was a washed-out sky with a newsreel look to it, and he wanted something that looked very much like a documentary photograph. And he was helped, he said, in his efforts by the smog in the valley, because they were forced to shoot most of this in the Columbia back lot because of the tight schedule and the tight budget. And so in most cases they had a very hazy sky every day, and which helped them get this effect.
Trouble is, they still had no leading man. And considering how closely Gary Cooper is identified with Marshal Will Kane, it's hard to believe that anybody had the misgivings they did about him being cast in that role. It wasn't as though he couldn't act. After all, he had won an Oscar for Sergeant York. Well, it may have been a case of, what have you done for me lately?
Gary Cooper was considered by the studio to be an aging actor who no longer had the box office appeal that he'd had before, and he had just come off 2 flops, so nobody was that eager to see Gary Cooper in a movie.
They were worried about his age, because the character as written was only supposed to be in his mid-30s, like most Hollywood heroes actually, and they were slightly worried with it, but of course that works wonderfully well, as it turns out.
As there were misgivings about Fred Zinnemann and Gary Cooper, why should Grace Kelly have been any different? Especially after her first meeting with Fred.
She came and was wearing white gloves and answered every question with a yes or a no, and was very prim and proper. And my father, who's not very good in those sorts of making people feel at ease when they don't, didn't know quite what to say with her, but felt that she would be perfect for the role because he wanted just that feeling in the part.
And she was kind of, I was going to say bashful, but she wasn't totally satisfied with her performance. She felt it. I guess she felt kind of awkward, and it's not an easy role.
And also there was a 30-year age difference between Cooper and Grace Kelly, and he was somewhat worried about that, but he decided somehow to make that work, and he used it in the film.
I guess it was hard for any leading lady to be next to Gary Cooper.
High Noon had more problems than casting in a tight shooting schedule. The 50s were dark times.
The McCarthy hearings were in full swing, and there was a lot of paranoia going on in Hollywood, and a few of the people on this picture were caught up in that. One of them was Floyd Crosby, and another was Carl Foreman.
My father put it to Gary Cooper and his friend Bruce Church, was the Republican businessman who put up a lot of the money for the film. Whether they felt comfortable with him staying on board, and they not only made it clear they were comfortable with him staying on board, that they would only stay on board if he remained in the film.
Carl Foreman saw High Noon as an allegory about his own persecution during the McCarthy era.
It was partially intended as an allegory of the blacklist. That's absolutely the case.
And it's a fascinating study of gender, way ahead of its time.
The Helen Ramirez character, played by Katie Horado, is fascinating, completely unlike most equivalent characters. Not only, is she not killed saving the white, the fact that she's there at all, in fact, there is a Mexican person in this town. It's also quite interesting. It is of some significance. Secondly, she's a businesswoman. She's a widow. She owns the saloon, and she's a silent partner in the general store. She's one of the more important business people of the town, which is a sort of notion that must have been fairly unusual. And in the 1950s, we didn't think of that kind of thing then.
Which is why it has such resonance today. It's also a terrific suspense film. I mean, it's just a great story.
It keeps reappearing over the years because of its timelessness, and you can say it's about the McCarthy era. You can say it's about something that's going on now.
It's about dealing with fear. I mean, I think that's part of it. It's also perhaps people see America as going alone in a world that's either indifferent or hostile, or certainly or cowardly, too cowardly to help against a dangerous enemy.
It just relates to everybody through the ages, and I think that's why it's had the success that it's had.
And when it came to award time, High Noon the movie was definitely not High Noon, left in the lurch. It received nominations for Best Picture, Director, Screenplay, and Cinematography. And Dmitri Tiomkin won 2 Oscars for Best Title Ballad and the Best Score. Elmo Williams won for his brilliant editing. And my father, Gary Cooper, walked away with his 2nd Academy Award. Thank you for joining us for this brief look behind High Noon. I'm Maria Cooper.